Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. Tonight, we face a case unlike any other in Nero Wolfe and Archie's Vanishing hour. Archie Goodwin, the voice, the wit, the eyes of Wolfe's investigations, disappears without warning. A vanished hour, a missing man, and a silence even Wolfe cannot ignore. What truth lies behind the disappearance of his most trusted companion? Are you listening late at night or during your morning tea? Let us know below. If you're drawn to stories of loyalty, cunning, and crime, subscribe and join our circle of mystery. Light a candle, steady your thoughts, and let the search begin. If you've never had the pleasure of spending a rainy Tuesday in the Brownstone, allow me to give you the flavor. At 10:58 a.m., Nero Wolfe was at his desk, half buried behind the Times crossword and a 7-minute boiled egg. I was reclining in the red leather chair, 2 buttons undone, sipping a coffee Fritz would have thrown at me if he hadn't made it himself. The rain had started around 9, light and lazy, but by the time the clock struck 11, it was playing drums on the window panes like it had something personal against the glass. And just as the second hand passed the hour, the phone rang. It wasn't the kind of ring that said telemarketer or wrong number. It rang like it meant business. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. Goodwin speaking. The voice on the other end was female, cultivated and pitched to skip over small talk. "Is this Mr. Goodwin? The assistant to Mr. Wolfe?" "That's right," I said. "But if you're trying to sell us anything, we're fully stocked on cleaning supplies and detective novels." "I'm not selling anything," she said. "I'd like to request a consultation with Mr. Wolfe. In person." As soon as possible, I looked over at Wolfe, who hadn't moved a muscle beyond rotating his wrist to see the time. "He's listening," I said. "May I have your name?" "Callista Vaughan." Wolfe's eyebrows didn't twitch, which told me either he didn't know her or he was pretending not to. The name was unusual enough to stir up a search engine, but my brain works faster than Google. "And the nature of the consultation, Miss Vaughan?" "I'd rather not discuss it over the phone," she said, "but it concerns something that went missing yesterday. Something I believe someone in your office may have had access to." I gave Wolfe the raised eyebrow cue, which usually gets me a grunt or a scowl. Instead, he lifted his eyes and said calmly, "Invite her." But not before 4, I relayed the message. "I'll be there," she said. "And Mr. Goodwin, please make sure the clocks are working." Before I could ask her what the devil that meant, she hung up. Now, Wolfe may not have been impressed, but I had an itch at the base of my neck. It could have been the barometric pressure, or it could have been the fact that we hadn't had a good client in 10 days. But what really put a wrinkle in the collar was her parting shot about the clocks. You see, we don't just have clocks in the Brownstone, we have a ritual of them. Wolfe believes time is a tool of civilization. The one in the front room was French, lacquered, and smug. The one in the kitchen had Roman numerals and kept ticking no matter how thick Fritz cut the bacon. My favorite was the small brass-cased model on Wolfe's desk, which he wound himself every Saturday at exactly 3:15 p.m. That one had stopped. At 11:04, I didn't like it. I decided to do a walkthrough. Something didn't feel right, and when something doesn't feel right around here, it usually isn't. The office clock was dead. The hallway clock was ticking, but behind by 6 minutes. The kitchen clock, Fritz's pride and joy, was spot on. But the brass beauty on Wolfe's desk stopped. Cold. I gave it a little shake. Nothing. The key was still tucked beneath the base. Untouched. Fritz swore he hadn't wound it since Saturday, and I knew Wolfe never missed it. That left me with 2 options: coincidence or sabotage. And Wolfe doesn't do coincidence. At precisely 4, Miss Callista Vaughan arrived with the wind at her back and a perfume that could have copyrighted itself. She wore a charcoal coat over a silk blouse that didn't come from the Macy's clearance rack. Her face had the polish of old money and the expression of someone who didn't like being looked at too long. Fritz showed her in, and I did the honors. "Nero Wolfe," I said. "This is Miss Vaughan." Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. He gave her a mild nod and gestured toward the client chair. She sat, crossing her legs with the kind of grace that gets taught at expensive boarding schools. "I won't waste your time," she began. "Yesterday morning, I noticed something missing from my home." A small blue folder. "I had shown it to someone connected to your office." Wolfe said nothing. She continued, "Specifically, I showed it to Mr. Goodwin. Now, I don't flinch easily, but I admit that one got a full blink out of me. I think," she said, turning toward me, "you'll recall our meeting." Wolfe's voice was silk-draped steel. "Archie?" I cleared my throat. "I've never met this woman before in my life." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a photo. In the photo, there I was. Yours, truly. Standing next to her in a coffee shop, looking very interested in what she was saying. "I assure you," she said, "this was taken last Friday. It was a good likeness. Very good. So good it made me uncomfortable. But I wasn't there last Friday. I'd spent the day driving Wolfe to the plant nursery in Yonkers, where he spent a harrowing 20 minutes berating a poor sap for mislabeling tuberoses." Wolfe spoke, quiet but sharp. "Miss Vaughan, are you alleging that my assistant took your folder?" "No," she said. "I'm saying I believe someone is impersonating him." And I want to know why Wolfe leaned back. His fingers touched, tips to tips, like the bridge of a Gothic cathedral. "And the folder?" he asked. "It contains documents pertaining to a private estate," she said. "They have implications." I waited for Wolfe to ask what kind, but he didn't. He just said, "You are being watched." Her eyes widened. "You knew?" I inferred. "And will you help me?" Wolfe frowned. "Mr. Goodwin did not meet you. He did not take your folder. Yet you have a photograph suggesting otherwise. That photograph is fabricated. Or he has a twin." She looked at me again. "Do you have a twin, Mr. Goodwin?" "Not unless he's been hiding from child support payments." Wolfe waved a hand. "Miss Vaughan, I will take the case. Not because I believe you, but because someone has made the error of misusing my assistant's likeness." Her eyes flashed something between gratitude and calculation. "Then you'll begin immediately." "No," Wolfe said. "I will begin tomorrow. At 6:30, I dine after she left." Wolfe finally addressed me without looking up. "Fine soul," quietly. "Have him investigate Miss Vaughan's movements for the last 4 days. And the photograph? We will test the negative if we must. But first, someone has stolen an hour of your time, Archie." I poured myself another cup of coffee. "And you, sir," I said, "don't like wasted hours." Wolfe gave the smallest of nods. "They are the most difficult to recover. I don't mind being impersonated in theory. I've seen enough B-movies to know there's some charm in the idea of a look-alike taking the heat while you lounge somewhere with a cold one. But when a woman you've never met drops a picture of you at a coffee shop you've never been to, right in front of Nero Wolfe, you start wondering if your name's being used for things you'd rather not be credited for, like grand larceny or poor tipping. By the time Callista Vaughan's perfume had settled into the rug, and she disappeared into the early evening drizzle, Wolfe had already summoned me back into the office. I leaned against the door jamb while he sat motionless in his throne-like chair, eyes half-lidded, fingers steepled. "I don't like it," I said, and meant it. "Nor do I," Wolfe replied. "Someone is performing an intricate deception. They have fabricated a likeness of you, arranged a photograph with Miss Vaughan, and associated it with the theft of sensitive materials. That suggests forethought. Intention and talent," I added. "That photo wasn't slapped together in someone's basement with scissors and glue." "Indeed," he said, with a tone that could have chilled champagne. "The perpetrator is skilled and unafraid to touch my domain. That is provocative and intolerable. That might sound like bombast to you, but coming from Wolfe, it's close to a war cry. I've seen him endure, people misquoting Pliny and insulting his orchids without blinking. But impersonating me, and and, by proxy, him, that's a shot across the bow. He reached for the phone and called Saul Panzer. I didn't need to hear the whole conversation to know what he was instructing. Saul would dig up Vaughan's past week with the delicacy of a cat burglar and the accuracy of a tax auditor. When he hung up, Wolfe finally turned to me with eyes that were more awake than they'd been since the mustard crisis of 1952. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "you will visit the cafe in that photograph." I raised an eyebrow. "Assuming it exists?" "It does." I recognized the cornice molding on the back wall. It belongs to a small cafe on 87th near Amsterdam, operated by a former pâtissier from Nice. You and I dined there once before the war. You claimed the eclair was too philosophical. Now that you mention it, I did get existential halfway through the cream filling. He grunted, which I took as agreement. "You will speak to the staff. Determine if you were there last Friday or someone who looked like you. Bring the photo, and if they confirm I was there, then we are in deeper waters than I assumed. Someone with either surgical precision or intimate access has set the stage. And if they don't recognize me at all, then Miss Vaughan is lying, or someone is impersonating you with sufficient skill to fool her, the cafe staff, and a camera. Either way, the performance is elaborate, and therefore expensive. Wolfe hates nothing more than expensive drama. He also hates unexplained deviations in routine, and the stopped clock was still on his mind. As I rose to go prepare for my field trip, he nodded once toward the brass-cased timepiece on his desk. "Bring it to Mr. Jarvis at the horology shop. I want to know precisely what stopped it, and when." "That makes 3 of us," I said, lifting the clock gingerly. "Though I doubt it'll tell us who's pulling my strings." Wolfe closed his eyes. "No, Archie, but it may tell us when your strings were pulled." The next morning, armed with the photo, the stopped clock wrapped in a towel, and a mild hangover from trying to solve the mystery with 2 bourbons and a deck of solitaire, I headed to 87th and Amsterdam. The rain had given way to a fog so thick it could have passed for soup, which made the little cafe's warm yellow windows look like beacons. Inside, the place smelled of espresso, warm pastry, and regret, a combo I've learned to associate with people who spend long afternoons staring into their cups. A barista with a French accent and Brooklyn tattoos greeted me with polite confusion when I asked about last Friday. "I work the counter every day," he said, narrowing his eyes at the photo. "This guy? Maybe. The face looks familiar, but we get lots of guys in jackets like that." "Yours?" "Yeah," I said. "Or someone's attempt at being me. Did he talk to anyone?" He shook his head. "No, just coffee. Sat by the window, wasn't here long, had a scar above his right brow." "You don't scar?" I blinked. "No, I don't." "Then maybe not you," he said with a shrug. "But close. Real close. I left him a tip big enough to make me feel like a Rockefeller and stepped out into the fog. So it wasn't me, but close enough to make a barista hesitate. That meant either Wolfe was right, again, or I had a long-lost evil twin making side money by copying my wardrobe. Next stop, Jarvis Horology on Lexington. The place smelled like polished wood, oil, and time. Mr. Jarvis was an elderly man who handled clocks the way priests handle communion wafers. He accepted Wolfe's desk clock with a reverence I don't even reserve for brandy. "This is a fine piece," he murmured. "Edwardian, hand-polished brass. Delicate mechanism. You say it stopped suddenly?" "Right around 11:04, Monday morning," he nodded. "Then I'll look for signs of magnetic interference, subtle jamming, perhaps even a disrupted balance wheel." "Do you suspect sabotage?" "I suspect someone wants to make us think time itself is lying." He squinted at me like he wasn't sure if I was being poetic or stupid. "I'll call you this afternoon." Back at the Brownstone, Wolfe was finishing his lunch, a trout dish that smelled like subtle revenge. He motioned me in and listened quietly as I laid it all out. The barista, the scar, the timing, the near miss on identity. His fingers tapped once against the arm of the chair. "Scar above the right brow," he repeated. "Unmistakable. That is no accident. You think it's a disguise detail?" "I think it's an intentional flaw," Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. "The impersonator wants to be almost convincing." "Not entirely. To confuse, to create doubt," I frowned. "Why go through all that trouble if the whole game is to make me not believe I was there?" "Because," Wolfe said slowly, "this is not about you. You are bait, a proxy. Someone is maneuvering us into their theater and setting the stage one prop at a time." The phone rang before I could respond. Wolfe picked it up. "Panzer," he said. A long pause. "Excellent. Proceed as instructed. Return by 5. He hung up, then gave me that look he reserves for moments when the plot has thickened just enough to stand a spoon in. "Saul found something," he said. "Miss Vaughan met privately with a known legal forger, 2 days before she claimed to have met you." My pulse ticked up. "So she planted the photo?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps she's planted something more elaborate." He looked at the stopped clock on his desk, its absence now a glaring hole in the office's rhythm. "Someone has tampered with our time, Archie. And I intend to find out why, before the next hour disappears. If you've ever tried telling Nero Wolfe he's being manipulated, you'll find he doesn't take it personally. He takes it strategically. While most men would get red in the face or start swinging accusations, Wolfe retreats. Mentally, he begins a siege from within. You can almost hear the drawbridge rise behind his eyes. After the call from Saul Panzer, Wolfe didn't speak for a full 3 minutes. That might sound like a short wait to you, but in a Brownstone where the usual tempo is butter-smooth routines and civilized argumentation, silence can stretch longer than a courtroom recess. I watched him fold his hands, index fingers pressed gently against his chin, and I knew we were entering the part of the case where Wolfe began rearranging chess pieces none of us could yet see. "She lied," I said helpfully. "Yes," he said, still watching the spot where the brass clock usually sat. "But not in the ordinary way. She said she met me at the cafe. She didn't. She said a folder went missing. No evidence of that either. And now she's linked to a forger. That sounds like the ordinary kind of lie to me." "No, Archie. An ordinary lie obscures the truth. This lie invites you to find it. It performs," I frowned. "So it's a staged deception?" "Precisely. A fiction that tempts correction. Whoever crafted this illusion wanted us to tug at the seams. That is what concerns me." That's when the front bell rang. Wolfe didn't move. He never does. I went to the door and opened it to find a man in his early 50s with a professor's coat, a professor's beard, and, judging by the expression on his face, the disoriented air of a professor who just realized he's left his notes on the subway. "Mr. Goodwin," he asked. "Present. You are." "Victor Hepplewhite. I believe your employer is expecting me." "He is?" "Yes. Miss Vaughan said she scheduled me for 4:15. I squinted. "She scheduled you?" "That's what the note said." "Hand delivered. Signed by your assistant." I stepped aside. "Come in, Mr. Hepplewhite. Let's compare autographs." When we entered the office, Wolfe didn't rise naturally, but his eyes tracked the newcomer like a hawk clocking a field mouse with a thesaurus. I introduced them and handed Wolfe the note Hepplewhite had brought, an envelope bearing Wolfe's letterhead and a flawless imitation of my signature. My real one. Not the one I sign for deliveries or stake receipts, but the one I use when notarizing client statements. "Mr. Hepplewhite," Wolfe said coolly, "what prompted Miss Vaughan to send you here?" "She said you'd requested context regarding the legal documents I prepared for her last spring," he replied, blinking rapidly. "But it seems I've misunderstood." "You have," Wolfe said. "You were deceived." The man looked flustered. Then, "May I ask what this is all about?" "No," Wolfe said. "You may not." "Thank you for coming. You are dismissed." Hebblewhite sputtered a little, then gathered what was left of his dignity and departed. I watched the door click shut and turned to Wolfe. So we're dealing with someone who has access to our stationery and my personal signature. Indeed, which I don't recall authorizing. Of course not. The forgery is precise. Whoever created it has either handled your documents directly or copied them from a source with that access, which narrows it down to what? 30 people? Fewer, he said. You're sloppy with names, Archie, but you're not careless with your pen. The copies made in this office of invoices, receipts, correspondence are filed meticulously. The original signature was likely extracted from discarded drafts. Someone's been rooting through our refuse. I groaned. So we're under surveillance and being impersonated. And someone has planted a false client, fabricated evidence, and misdirected the target of the crime, if there even was a crime. You're saying nothing's been stolen? I'm saying the theft, if real, is not the point. The performance is... That's when Fritz buzzed from the kitchen. Telephone, Mr. Goodwin. It's Mr. Jarvis. I picked it up on the hallway line. Mr. Goodwin, came the old clockmaker's voice, soft and brittle as moth wings. Your desk clock has not been tampered with externally, but the escapement lever has been subtly misaligned. Not broken, just nudged. It would have stopped after a few rotations, perhaps 30 seconds to a minute after winding. And how long would it take a clock like that to stop completely after such an interference? Depending on where the balance wheel paused, 45 seconds. Give or take 5, I thanked him and hung up. Back in the office, Wolfe was now reading the label off an empty spice jar. One of the ones from the kitchen shelves Fritz kept alphabetized like scripture. Minor trespasses, he muttered. Nothing stolen. Just shifted. The clock was sabotaged from inside, I told him. Subtle. Could have been done in under a minute. Ah. You think Miss Vaughan planted it? No, I think Miss Vaughan is playing a role, and doing so willingly. But the true director of this performance has not yet stepped into the spotlight. That's when Saul Panzer returned. He walked into the room like a man who's been listening more than he's been talking. And when Saul gets quiet, something important's brewing. He nodded to Wolfe and handed me a small notebook. Vaughan's been using a second name at a private address in Brooklyn Heights, Saul said. Goes by Rena Hill with the building manager. Pays in cash. Visits 3 times a week. The man who comes in just after she leaves. Same guy with the scar from the cafe I flipped through the notes. Any name on him? Not yet. But he's good. Slippery. Military posture. Might be ex-intelligence. Wolfe's brows lifted. And the building? Rental, fully furnished. Utilities included. Lease signed 3 months ago by a shell company. Wolfe leaned back. Then it begins to emerge. I waited. He closed his eyes. Archie, tomorrow you will return to the cafe, but this time not to investigate. Go at the exact time the photo was supposedly taken. Sit at the same table, order the same drink, and be seen. To what end? To accelerate the play? If we cannot prevent the performance, we shall upstage it. You're baiting them. I'm inviting them. To finish what they started. He opened his eyes. We are now part of the script, Archie. Time to see who wrote the next act. I've played bait before. More times than I care to count, but usually when I do, I know what I'm dangling, who's supposed to bite, and what happens when the hook sinks in. This time I was the bait, the lure, and the fish all rolled into one. Wolfe's instructions were clear. Go to the cafe at the exact time of the original photo, sit in the same place, wear the same coat, order the same coffee, and let myself be seen. What wasn't clear was who was watching, or what they planned to do about it. The morning was grey again, the same as it had been that Friday, which made it easier to recreate the atmosphere. I arrived 10 minutes early, gave the same barista a nod. He didn't remember me from the last visit, which was either a testament to how average my face was or how good their coffee was at erasing memories. And I slid into the seat near the window. I placed the photo on the table in front of me, casually enough to look like I'd just pulled it from a wallet. The image showed me, or someone close enough to fake a signature, sitting right here. I angled the photo so it was visible from the counter and kept my eyes moving. Wolfe had drilled it into me. Don't look like you're looking. That's a trick most cops never learn. They stare too hard, or not at all. The trick is to be curious without being interested. I scanned the room, slow and natural. A student with headphones, a woman with a tablet and a half-eaten muffin. Two men in business jackets, deep in conversation. A guy near the back with a newspaper who kept flipping the pages a little too evenly, like he was more focused on the sound than the words. I took a sip of the coffee and waited. At exactly 10:51 a.m., which Wolfe had identified as the likely timestamp of the fake meeting, based on the clock manipulation and the angle of light in the photo, the guy with the newspaper folded it and stood. He passed by my table without looking directly at me, but I felt the tick of attention like static brushing past my shoulder. He went to the counter, ordered something, then exited without waiting. I watched him walk past the front window, his hand brushing the door frame just slightly on the way out. That would have been nothing if I hadn't noticed the small rectangular slip left on the edge of my table. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up and slid it into my inner pocket without opening it. There are times to read mysterious notes in public, and this wasn't one of them. Back at the Brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with a bowl of orange segments and a face that said, "Don't disturb unless you're carrying fresh crime." I tossed the note onto his desk and sat. "Someone left that on my table," I said. "Guy in a grey coat, clean-shaven, athletic build, maybe mid-30s. Didn't speak. Tapped the table as he passed. Wolfe leaned forward just enough to pick it up. He used a letter opener to unfold the flap, as if it might detonate. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper, typed on an old Remington or something made to look like one. The message read, "You're not who you were. Stop digging or you'll disappear again." Wolfe's brow twitched. I whistled. "That's subtle." "It's an echo," Wolfe muttered. "Of what?" "Of the clock. The photo, the forgery. It's all of a piece. They are constructing a fiction where your identity is fluid, where the reality of your actions can be rewritten. So they're not just impersonating me, they're erasing me? Not yet. But they are practicing the art. I didn't like the chill that settled under that sentence. I've had men try to ruin my reputation before. Comes with the job. But this wasn't defamation, it was replacement. Worse, it was a replacement done with enough elegance to make you doubt your own calendar. Wolfe put down the note and rang for Fritz. "Bring the folder from the blue cabinet." The one labeled Goodwin, legal Fritz arrived 2 minutes later with a slim binder, which Wolfe opened with surprising dexterity. He flipped to the back, where carbon copies of all notarized statements I'd signed in the last 5 years were filed. "Your signature has remained remarkably consistent," he said. "Should I take that as a compliment?" "You may take it as a clue. Whoever forged your name has studied it intimately. They've practiced, and more importantly, they've chosen to use it not for financial gain, but for choreography." I gave him a look. "You're going to have to expand on that. They're not after money, Archie. They're building a performance, a constructed scenario in which the idea of you, your face, your habits, your signature, can be wielded like a scalpel." I felt my neck itch. "That sounds like spy stuff." Wolfe didn't dignify that with an answer, but his expression conceded the point. The front doorbell rang again, and this time it was Saul. He walked in with his usual unhurried confidence and handed Wolfe a small black envelope. "I followed Vaughan, or Rena Hill, this morning. She met our scarred friend outside a pawn shop on Flatbush. They exchanged this." She left first. Wolfe opened it. Inside was a vintage-style photograph, smaller than the last, showing me, or the fake me, at the Brooklyn Heights rental. This time I was standing outside the building speaking to a third person I didn't recognize. The back of the photo was stamped with a date, 3 days from now. I stared at it. "That's impossible." No, Wolfe said. It's anticipatory. They faked a photo that hasn't happened yet. They intend to make it happen, Wolfe said, or make it seem to have happened. Either way, they are controlling the narrative by introducing future events as certainties. If they can make it appear that you've already done something, they only need the moment to follow for it to be believed. Which means, whatever they're planning, it's going down in 72 hours, and they're planning to put me at the scene in advance. Correct. I stood, pacing. Wolfe, we're in the middle of someone else's script. They're not just using my name, they're directing my movements before I make them. He nodded, slowly. And, Wolfe said calmly, we shall now revise their script. Quietly, surgically. His gaze turned to Saul. We need to find the third man in that photo, identify him, trace his movements, observe the intersection between fact and fabrication. And me? I asked. You, Archie, Wolfe said, will become the version of yourself they didn't account for. You'd think having your future predicted by a staged photograph would make a guy slow down, maybe question his next few steps. But not me. When someone tries to build a reality around my name, my face, and my signature, I don't freeze. I walk straight through the illusion until the whole set collapses. Wolfe calls it impulsive. I call it quality control. The moment that photo hit Wolfe's desk with a date stamped 3 days in the future, the case moved from theatrical to operatic. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were inside someone else's design, and they were setting the tempo. Wolfe hated being outpaced almost as much as he hated canned asparagus, which, if you've ever watched him during spring market season, tells you how serious this was. That evening, Wolfe summoned me back into the office after Fritz had cleared the dinner dishes. He was seated as always, but his fingers were moving in that deliberate rhythm he gets when he's sorting abstract shapes into mental categories. I sat down, waiting for the curtain to rise. I have reviewed every element of this intrusion, he said, eyes fixed on the space where the missing clock usually sat. Every gesture, each note, each forged interaction is calibrated not for theft, but for proof. Proof of what? That you can be fabricated, he said. Duplicated. Made into a series of plausible events and responses, like a character. That's charming, I said. Except I'm very real, and I pay real taxes. He gave me a glance that said I was missing the point, which, let's face it, was probably true. Callista Vaughan, he continued, knew from the beginning that you would not remember meeting her. That was part of the structure. The goal was not to fool you, but to construct a narrative that could survive your denial. A lie that becomes stronger the more I resist it. Yes, and now the second photograph has upped the ante. It presents a future reality, a prophecy. If you don't appear at that Brooklyn address 3 days from now, the picture still exists, still looks real, still fits the timeline. And if I do show up, I said, they win. Precisely. Either way, you're trapped. You've been written into a story that is not yours. I sat back. So we burn the script. Flip the ending, no, Wolfe said. We write a new scene. One they cannot anticipate. That was my cue to get moving, and Wolfe didn't waste time outlining the choreography. The plan involved a 2-day setup, a schedule designed to bait our mystery playwright into acting too soon, and a little help from our usual ensemble. Saul, Fred, and Ori. Wolfe gave me marching orders, so detailed they could have passed for an architectural blueprint. I had to duplicate my daily routine to the minute, but make just enough noise to throw shadows on what the other Archie might be doing. The next morning I did my usual run of errands. Post office, grocer, and shoe shop. Only this time, I made sure I was seen. I chatted with people I usually don't say more than 2 words to. I left receipts behind. I let a kid snap a photo of me in front of the bakery under the pretense of needing a subject for his photography class. Wolfe wanted a breadcrumb trail of irrefutable proof that I was where I claimed to be, and he wanted it known. Meanwhile, Saul was tracking down the mystery man from the future photo. The third figure is the unknown variable. We still didn't have a name, but Saul had narrowed him to a former psychological operations officer named Gilbert Thorne. Retired, unlicensed, and fond of theatricality. The kind of man who knew how to script not just a lie, but a believable reality. Thorne had last worked under contract for a security firm with ties to high-end estate disputes, which, according to Saul's research, placed him adjacent to one of Callista Vaughan's recent business ventures, a contested inheritance involving a discredited cousin and an obscure codicil filed outside the country. I brought that little gem back to Wolfe just before lunch. He chewed it over between bites of Fritz's braised quail and nodded once. "So it is not just a performance," he said. "It is a preparation." For what? For a case. A trial, perhaps even a deposition. If they can show that you, Archie, were in two places, doing two different things, then any future testimony you provide becomes suspect. Your reliability is gone. It clicked. "They're not framing me for a crime," I said. "They're discrediting me before I can testify." "Exactly. So what's the testimony?" "That," Wolfe said, "is what we must determine." By late afternoon, Fred Durkin had identified the location in the future photo, an alley near the Brooklyn Heights apartment, routinely used as a delivery path for the surrounding buildings. Quiet, secluded, perfect for a staged exchange. Ori was placed on rotation to photograph the alley every 4 hours. Wolfe wanted to document it empty. Day and night, a timeline of nothing, leading right up to the timestamp on the fake photo. That evening, I got another note. This one was hand-delivered to the Brownstone while Fritz was out in the market. Same typeface, same envelope, different tone. "He will be there. So will she. You can stop pretending, Mr. Goodwin." I handed it to Wolfe. He read it once, twice, and laid it flat. "They've accelerated. They know we're building counterproof." I sighed, which means they'll try to trigger the event early. "Then we must be ahead of them," Wolfe said. "You will spend tomorrow at the Botanical Garden. Have your name entered in the ticket registry. Make sure your photo is taken near the Eastern Greenhouse at noon, because that's the same time as the fake meeting. Yes, let them try to place you in two places at once." I left with a sense of gathering weight, the kind that tells you the curtain is about to rise and you're not entirely sure if you're the lead or the trapdoor technician. That night, as I sat in my apartment with the photo in my hand, I couldn't help but stare at the version of me smiling in a place I'd never been, next to a man I'd never met, on a day that hadn't happened yet. It was like looking at a memory someone else had forged. But Wolfe was right. We weren't just solving a mystery. We were correcting the story. The next act I knew was coming, and this time I planned to write myself in. There are things I do well. I can tail a man through Midtown without getting noticed. I can recall a conversation word for word, even if it's bookended by gunfire and bad coffee. And I can spot a tail almost as fast as I can spot a bad toupee. But there's one thing I do better than any of that. I know when I'm being watched for the wrong reasons. Not by some anxious client or hired muscle. I mean watched, as in surveilled, studied, dissected. That was the feeling I had as I stepped into the Brooklyn Botanical Garden the next day. I wasn't carrying a gun. Wolfe hates it when I do. But I might as well have had a red neon sign over my head that said, "Insert conspiracy here." Wolfe's plan was simple. Be seen, be time-stamped, be elsewhere. The goal was to create an indisputable alibi that no photograph could override. That meant clear public proof, digital entry logs, public-facing cameras, and a family of tourists from Ohio who'd unknowingly become my key witnesses when I offered to take a picture for them and made sure I was in two of theirs. I wandered the paths with my coat open and my chin up, making a performance out of admiring flowers I couldn't name. At precisely 12:03 p.m., the time stamped on the fake photo, or he called to report that the alley in Brooklyn Heights remained empty. No Archie, no scarred man, no Rena Hill, no anything. I felt the knot behind my ribs loosen. The script had been interrupted. That night, back at the Brownstone, Wolfe listened as I detailed every moment. He nodded once when I handed over the tourist photos, flipped through them with a distaste he reserved for public parks, and placed them in a file. Fritz brought in tea, which Wolfe didn't touch, and we waited for Saul to return. He arrived close to 7, face unreadable. Wolfe didn't speak, just looked. "I followed Thorne," Saul said. He met with Vaughan at a second location, an office above a defunct bookshop in Borum Hill. No name on the buzzer. The building's owned by a holding company out of Delaware. Inside I saw 2 desks, 3 phones, and a whiteboard filled with what looked like legal names and estate codes. "Any connections to known cases?" Wolfe asked. Saul nodded. One jumped out, the Robbling estate, $62 million in disputed assets. The key witness, a private investigator hired to verify the heir's identity. That investigator was your man, Mr. Goodwin. I stared. "I never touched the Robbling case." "Not according to the files," Saul said. "There's a signed affidavit with your name and seal on it. It verifies the legitimacy of one Cora Holden as the heir. Never heard of her." "You will," Wolfe said. "They've already introduced your signature as fact. The photograph in the alley is merely the next reinforcement. With your credibility pre-manufactured and their documentation staged, they intended to use your name to settle the estate in favor of their chosen heir. And collect a fee on the back end. Or several," Wolfe murmured. "The implication here is not fraud. It is precedent. If they succeed in manipulating perception, testimony, and verification all in one sweep, they've built a business model." I felt like I needed a shower. "So what's our next move?" "Now," Wolfe said, "we make them panic." At 10 the next morning, we played our cards. Wolfe placed a discreet call to a senior prosecutor in the district attorney's office, a man who owed him a favor and understood the gravity of the phrase fabricated witness trail. Wolfe provided just enough information to open a quiet investigation into the Robbling filings. Not enough to spook our friends, but enough to begin checking signatures and timelines. The pressure valve turned a quarter inch. By noon, Saul reported that Thorne and Vaughan had gone underground. Their office was scrubbed, phones disconnected, mail rerouted. It was as close to a retreat as we were likely to see. But Wolfe wasn't done. That evening, we hosted a guest. Her name was Evelyn Robeling, and she was the real heir, someone who had declined to participate in the estate dispute until, as she put it, certain forces began making me feel like I didn't exist. She brought with her a box of documents, none of which bore my name or signature, but several of which referenced decisions allegedly made based on my verification. False meetings, doctored reports. One even listed a date I'd been out of the country. "This," she said, "was what made me come forward. I remembered seeing your name on a case Wolfe solved when I was in college. I knew something didn't add up." Wolfe inclined his head, which for him is a standing ovation. "You were wise, Miss Robeling. And timely." We handed over everything, both photos, the notes, the envelope, the details on Thorne's setup, to the DA's office. Wolfe insisted on courier delivery by Fred, who placed the package directly into the hands of an assistant who understood words like forgery and preemptive perjury. Then we waited. It didn't take long. By Friday morning, 2 arrests were made. Thorne and a middleman who'd been notarizing faked documents for various shell heirs across 3 states. Vaughan had vanished again, but with enough digital threads to make her extraditable once someone pulled the cord. That afternoon, Wolfe finally replaced the clock on his desk. The repair had been completed, the balance wheel reset. I stood there watching him as he turned the key slowly and set the hands to 12:04. "Why that time?" I asked. Because it was the time you didn't appear in the photograph. It will remind me of what? He looked at me, then at the clock. That facts may be forged, but time remains incorruptible when one has the will to watch it. There's a particular quiet that settles over the Brownstone when Wolfe knows he's winning. It's not smug or theatrical, not his style. It's the kind of quiet you get when a chess player sees the checkmate coming 5 moves early and decides not to gloat until the board agrees. The day after Thorne and his partner were arrested, the whole place took on that hush. No radio, no muttering about the state of orchids, not even Fritz humming in the kitchen. Just the calm before Wolfe made his final move. Not that things were over. Far from it. The big fish, Miss Callista Vaughan, Achaia Rena Hill, was still loose, and while the paperwork had been turned over to the authorities, Wolfe wasn't satisfied. He wanted the architect, not just the contractors. The woman who'd walked into our office with a forged photo and a too-perfect story hadn't just faked a meeting, she'd tried to restructure the concept of evidence itself. And Wolfe doesn't forgive philosophical infractions lightly. We were in the office that afternoon, both of us reading, me pretending to care about a magazine article on convertible imports, while Wolfe revisited an obscure treatise on evidentiary logic, when the phone rang. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office. A pause. Then, "Mr. Goodwin." It was her. I straightened in the chair. "Speaking. I hope I'm not interrupting." I gave Wolfe a look. He met it with a blink and a fractional nod. "Not at all," I said. "You sound surprisingly calm for a woman with half her crew behind bars." A short, rueful laugh. "Not all of them. And not for long, I imagine. So what's the call for?" I asked. "You want to congratulate us on surviving your little stage play?" "No," she said. "I want to make a trade." That got Wolfe's attention. He leaned forward slightly. I put her on speaker. "I'm listening," I said. "You've already guessed the Roebling scam," she said evenly. "But it wasn't the only one. There are at least 4 more estates where witnesses are being created, documents are being aged, and photographs are being planted. I can give you names, addresses, and dates, but in exchange, I want indemnity." Wolfe spoke then, voice soft and precise. "You want to walk away clean?" "I want a deal." "You're not in a courtroom," Wolfe said, "and I'm not the prosecution. What makes you think I care to negotiate?" "Because," she said, "you haven't found the origin. You've only found the edge, and because you'd rather end this now than let it drag into appeals and sealed testimony." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You will come here," he said. "Tonight, 8 o'clock. You will bring documentation. No recordings, no observers. I want hard copies. You'll protect me." "I will listen." She paused. "That's not a promise." "No," Wolfe said. "But it's the best offer you'll get before someone less civilized finds you." She hung up. I exhaled. "Think she'll show?" "She must," Wolfe said. "She wants us to believe she has the upper hand." "That only works if we see her play it." I was already thinking about contingencies. Fritz would be gone by 8. Ori would be stationed nearby in case things got cute. Saul would follow her from wherever she came. Wolfe was preparing his trap. Not with handcuffs or guns, but with posture and tone and quiet certainty. At 7:56 p.m., I buzzed her in. She was dressed differently this time. Simpler. A grey wool coat, hair pinned tight, face bare. No perfume, no tricks, but her eyes were still calculating. I led her into the office, where Wolfe remained seated like a statue that thought better than most people breathe. "Miss Vaughan," he said. "Or should I say Hill?" "Vaughan will do." She sat, but not in the client chair. She picked the one by the bookshelf, evasive body language, designed to signal caution. Wolfe noticed. Of course he did. "You have documents," he said. She opened a slim case and handed over a folder. Inside were detailed records, more fake affidavits, notarized lies, doctored timestamps, and witness photos with inconsistent shadows. "You're thorough," I said. She didn't smile. "You don't run a long con halfway." "Why us?" Wolfe asked. "Why choose Mr. Goodwin's likeness?" She looked at me. "Because your reputation is unimpeachable. Because you're visible but not famous. Because if you said you were somewhere, people believed it. And if someone tried to contradict you, they'd be doubted." "That's a compliment I could have lived without," I muttered. She went on. "We didn't want you accused, just undermined. A shadow of doubt cast over your reliability. One false sighting, one inconsistent photo. If your memory is fallible, your testimony is disqualified, diabolical," Wolfe murmured. She shrugged. "It's math. Probability. We just gamed the concept of trust." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Who funded you?" She hesitated. "Miss Vaughan," he said coldly. "You came here to confess." "Not hedge." "Name them." She looked down. "Simeon Harlesden. He oversees the trust fund for the Roebling estate. He's got 5 others queued for takeover. He used us to fabricate legitimacy, then buries the chain of evidence in complicated shell firms." "And you?" Wolfe asked. "I was paid well to build the illusion," she said, "and I believed in the concept. That truth isn't about facts. It's about narrative consistency." Wolfe closed the folder. "That," he said, "is the most dangerous idiocy I've heard in a decade." I looked at him. That was a Wolfe-level insult, and he meant it. She stood. "You have what you want. I'll vanish now." "No," Wolfe said. She blinked. "What?" "I said I would listen." "I did. I did not say you would leave." I nodded. "Ori's in the hallway." She opened her mouth, but Wolfe cut her off. "You constructed an illusion of time, of place, of certainty. But you overlooked something vital." "What?" He looked at the repaired clock on his desk. "Eventually," he said, "the hour strikes back." Callista Vaughan didn't protest. That was the first surprise. She stood there, coat still buttoned, lips parted just enough to say something, then didn't. She glanced toward the hallway, where Ori was surely positioned like a doorman with a warrant in his pocket, and she seemed to understand the game was up. Not because we'd caught her red-handed, but because we'd dismantled the stage she thought she controlled. Wolfe didn't move, of course. He never does. But his stillness filled the room like a verdict. "You'll remain seated," he said evenly. "Mr. Goodwin will escort you when the authorities arrive." She sat back down, as if Wolfe's voice had yanked the gravity out from under her. The folder sat on his desk, now containing documentation of at least 4 fabricated identities, 6 manipulated witness statements, and a signature, history of mine, that, while impressive, I hadn't personally authorized. "You realize," she said quietly, "that Harlesden won't let this go. He has assets, connections, people who clean up messes like this." "Then let him try," Wolfe replied. "If he has any interest in compounding a federal investigation with witness tampering, we shall accommodate him." I leaned back, arms crossed. He forged my name, faked my face, and tried to make me out as a delusional witness with a faulty memory. That puts him in a long line of people who've underestimated me, and an even shorter list of people who'll soon regret it. She said nothing. The silence was broken by the distant ring of the front bell. Fritz wasn't on duty, so I went. 2 men in suits, badges out, expressions taut. The lead introduced himself as ADA Quarles, and his partner was from the financial crimes unit. I stepped aside and let them in. When they entered the office and saw Wolfe, they paused out of habit like most men do when entering a room where the center of gravity isn't where they expected it to be. Wolfe gestured toward the folder. "The witness has confessed to direct involvement in a scheme to manipulate legal outcomes through falsified testimony, photographic evidence, and document forgery. Her confession and the associated physical evidence have been voluntarily turned over to you." The ADA gave Wolfe a sharp look. "And you're not recording this?" "I have no need to," Wolfe said. "I'm not a prosecutor. I'm an observer." a private citizen whose assistant was used without consent in an operation designed to discredit legitimate legal oversight. They turned to Callista. She didn't blink. She reached into her coat slowly. Everyone in the room tensed, but she only produced a business card. "Call this number," she said. "The files are there. You'll need credentials to access them. 4 names, all set to testify under forged identities next month. I can't stop Harlesden, but I can expose what I built for him." Quarles took the card and nodded to his partner. "Miss Vaughan," he said, "you're coming with us. We'll sort custody arrangements with the feds." She stood. This time she didn't glance back. I closed the door after them. Wolfe, eyes closed, finally leaned back, a breath leaving him as if someone had loosened a screw behind his sternum. "You know," I said, "for a woman who staged reality for a living, she folded pretty easily." "No," Wolfe murmured. "She understood narrative." "Meaning?" "Meaning she knew the only way to keep any leverage was to choose her own ending. That was the last control she had. I wasn't sure I liked that, but I didn't argue. Wolfe had a habit of finding the truth where most people stop at facts. That's part of the reason we work. The next morning, the paper ran a quiet little piece buried in the metro section. Forgery ring busted in estate. Dispute names weren't printed yet, but I recognized the bones. Saul confirmed Harlesden's assets were being quietly frozen. No charges yet. He had lawyers, and probably lawyers for his lawyers, but the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Wolfe placed a call to a certain high-level judge with an appreciation for civility and an interest in preserving the integrity of legal testimony. I wasn't privy to the whole conversation, but I heard Wolfe's tone shift ever so slightly when he said, "Yes, that's correct. My assistant," they used his name. No, he did not authorize it. After that, things moved. A statement was issued. The Roebling estate reopened its review process. My name was cleared, not that it had taken much damage, since Wolfe had prevented the photo from surfacing in any official filing, but now the record was cleaner than an autopsy on a mannequin. Still, I didn't relax. It's one thing to be impersonated. It's another to be pre-written. They hadn't just tried to steal my identity. They'd tried to construct a reality where I would one day defend their lies without knowing it. That stays with you. Wolfe, in his usual way, dealt with the matter the same way he deals with an infestation of fungus in his orchid room, swiftly and with utter contempt. 3 days after Vaughan's arrest, he held a gathering, not for press, for allies, people who'd been quietly circling the case. Judges, legal aides, 1 or 2 journalists with good instincts. The topic was simple: how easy it had become to manipulate evidence in the digital age, and how Wolfe had uncovered a pattern of deception using nothing more than conversation, paper, and timing. He didn't mention my name. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew the signature they'd seen faked. Afterward, back in the office, Wolfe poured himself half an ounce of brandy, lifted the glass to eye level, and nodded once in my direction. "That," he said, "was your hour." I blinked. "Come again?" "You were meant to vanish. Instead, you reappeared in exactly the place they didn't want you. Observable, constant, real. You became a fixed point in a forgery." I leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Thanks. But if it's all the same to you, I'd rather not do an encore." Wolfe nodded. "Time cannot be rewritten, Archie. But it can be rehearsed. They rehearsed your absence. You interrupted the performance. I let out a breath. And now?" He looked at the brass clock, ticking gently on his desk, newly repaired and positioned just so. "Now," he said, "we let the silence return." You'd think after a case like that, with fake photos, impersonations, forged affidavits, and a woman whose entire personality was made out of lies and long vows, things might slow down around the Brownstone. Maybe a few days of peace, a good meal or 2, uninterrupted by threats of identity theft, a chance to sleep past 8. But you'd be wrong. Because the truth is, when someone tries to erase you, really erase you, not just from a dinner invitation list, but from your own professional credibility, you don't bounce back by lounging around. You bounce back by staying visible, loud, and inconveniently real. And Wolfe, for all his apparent inertia, understood that better than anyone. So we didn't retreat into comfort. Instead, we made it known, discreetly of course, that Wolfe had unspooled something that was still fraying at the edges. That while Harlesden was under investigation, his files hadn't all been reviewed and his network hadn't all been mapped. Wolfe didn't need to say it directly. He simply let Saul be seen walking into the courthouse one morning and back out of a senator's office that afternoon. He let me accompany him on a visit to a rare orchid supplier who also happened to lunch weekly with a federal magistrate. He let implication do the work. And wouldn't you know it, on the second Tuesday after Vaughan's arrest, we received a visitor. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when Fritz called up to the office. "Mr. Goodwin, there is a man at the door. He does not have an appointment, but he is insistent." Fritz doesn't use that word lightly. I glanced at Wolfe, who didn't look up from his copy of The Atlantic. "Show him in," Wolfe said without putting down the magazine. "We shall indulge his insistence." I went to the front and opened the door. The man standing there was taller than me by an inch, which is already too tall for comfort, with dark, weathered skin and a sharp grey suit that looked like it had been sewn around the bones of a threat. His eyes were the shade of polished steel and twice as hard. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice soft, like sandpaper just before it tears skin. "You don't know me. Name's Bryce Kenner. I'm touched you came unannounced. Very noir of you." He smiled, but it didn't travel far. "I represent certain financial interests that intersect with what you've recently uncovered." I stepped aside. "Then come on in. We've got comfortable chairs and uncomfortable questions." He entered without hesitation. When I led him into the office, Wolfe didn't rise but folded the magazine with exaggerated calm and rested it beside him. "Mr. Kenner," he said, "we are acquainted by reputation. You represented the Cartlow Fund during their embezzlement scandal. You were praised for defending the indefensible." Kenner didn't blink. "I'm not here to rehash my resume, Mr. Wolfe. I'm here to suggest that further involvement in this Harlesden business may not serve your long-term interests." "Are you threatening me?" Wolfe asked, his tone flat enough to level a shelf. "No, sir," Kenner said. "I'm advising you." "You've made your point. The fakes are exposed. Your assistant's name is intact. Callista Vaughan is in custody. You've won. Drawing this out doesn't help anyone." Wolfe raised a brow. "It helps the law. It helps the truth. It helps Miss Evelyn Roebling, who was nearly defrauded of her inheritance. It helps every potential victim of fabricated witness schemes. It also helps federal eyes fall on clients who'd prefer to stay peripheral," Kenner said, his voice still cordial but tightening like a noose. "Some of those clients fund the very institutions you've worked to preserve." I was halfway out of my chair, but Wolfe gave the faintest wave. "Sit, Archie." I did. Barely. Wolfe shifted slightly, which for him is a seismic event. "Mr. Kenner, your presence suggests desperation. If your clients were confident, they would stay distant. They would let the legal process swallow this quietly. Instead, they send you because I'm the last polite option." Wolfe leaned forward. Not far, but enough to cast a shadow across the folder still resting on his desk. There are no polite options when one's identity has been stolen, manipulated, and rehearsed for a legal deception. Mr. Goodwin was not merely impersonated. He was placed on a narrative track, constructed for perjury, designed to weaponize credibility. Do you think I will walk away from that? I think you're a man who understands leverage. No, sir. I'm a man who understands permanence. Lies dissolve under pressure, but once the truth is known, it does not retreat. Kenner didn't like that. He stood. Then I've delivered my message. You do what you must. So will we. He left without another word. I watched him from the window. His car was black, untagged, and left no exhaust. The kind of car you see just before something very expensive explodes. Back in the office, Wolfe was already dialing the courthouse. "I take it we're not letting this go," I said. "Certainly not," Wolfe said. "They wish to make this about influence. Let us instead make it about fact." That afternoon, Wolfe issued a formal deposition to the DA's office, outlining the timeline of forged events, including the 2 photos, the false affidavit, the impersonation of me in Brooklyn, and the coercion attempt via Mr. Bryce Canner. It wasn't just testimony. It was a declaration of war on revisionism. Saul delivered it by hand. By dusk, word had reached the Bar Association. That night we sat in the office, the windows open just enough to let in the spring breeze, and the brass clock ticked in its usual calm rhythm. "You think they'll back off now?" I asked. "They will adjust," Wolfe said. "They are men of concealment. But we have made concealment more expensive." I nodded. "And Vaughan?" "She has bought herself leniency, but not forgiveness." There was a pause. Wolfe glanced at me. "They will come again, Archie. Not the same faces, not the same methods, but the temptation to alter truth is eternal." I smiled, but it didn't reach all the way. "Then we'll keep the clock wound," I said, "and our names are sharp." Wolfe gave the barest nod. "Time," he murmured, "is on our side, so long as we guard it." 1 week later, the Brownstone settled into something like normal again. The brass clock ticked with steady conviction. Wolfe resumed his sessions with the orchids, which meant the rest of us had an easier time avoiding verbal dismemberment. And me, I spent the better part of my days pretending to read the Times while fielding quiet thank-you calls from lawyers who now treated my signature like a holy relic. We'd weathered something odd, even by our standards. This hadn't been about murder or missing millions. It had been about manipulation. Quiet, bureaucratic manipulation, dressed up like theater and staged with the precision of an opera. The kind that worms into public record and doesn't show its face until it's changed 3 lives and rewritten history. And Wolfe had hated it. Not in the fire-breathing, shout-down-the-house sense, but in the kind of deep, moral way that made him dangerous. Wolfe believes in logic, yes, but he also believes in reality. The world turns, evidence builds, and things are. You can argue motive or meaning all day, but when you begin to fabricate the turning of the wheel itself, Wolfe takes it as a personal insult. Not to his intelligence, to civilization. The real resolution came not with an arrest, not with a front-page headline, but with a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Delivered by courier. It arrived on a Thursday just after lunch. Fritz brought it in on a silver tray, like it was a dessert we hadn't ordered. Wolfe took it, examined the envelope, and used the same paper knife he reserves for cutting certain cheeses to slit it open. He read it once, twice, then passed it across the desk without a word. I read it aloud. "Mr. Wolfe, I've turned myself into the federal building in Philadelphia. My testimony will confirm the Halsden pipeline, the shell accounts, and the false witnesses. I've submitted a full list to the investigators. You won't hear from me again. This is not contrition. I still believe narrative can be more powerful than fact. But you are right about one thing. Truth, when protected, leaves a scar on the lie, and some lies can't bear the weight of it." "Callista," I put it down. "She folded," I said. "No," Wolfe murmured. "She recalculated. Her escape was in controlling the end of her story. She lost the middle, so she seized the finale. She gave up the game." Wolfe's mouth twitched. She gave up the audience. Without credibility, her next deception would fall flat, and she couldn't tolerate a stage without applause. That was it. No more calls, no men in black sedans, no more envelopes on cafe tables. Just quiet. Later that afternoon, Saul came by with the final piece. The Financial Crimes Task Force had concluded its internal sweep. Harlesden had resigned from 3 boards, citing health reasons. No formal charges had been announced, but his legal team was cooperating. The implication was clear. They knew they'd been caught. They just didn't want the full story printed on courtroom stationery. Saul, of course, stayed for coffee. Fritz brought out a little hazelnut cake he'd been saving. I poured and watched Wolfe take it all in without comment, which is usually when he's thinking the loudest. As Saul left, I leaned against the edge of the desk. "You ever wonder why people go to such lengths?" I asked. "To fake things? To bend reality like that?" Wolfe closed his eyes. "Because truth requires labor. Because reality offers no shortcuts. A forged moment, a borrowed identity. It's the lazy man's dominion over the world. But it crumbles under scrutiny, as all laziness does," I whistled. "That's a sermon." "No," he said. "It's anatomy." The rest of the evening passed in silence. I read. Wolfe read. And the clock ticked with the solemnity of a man who'd been vindicated. But there was one more thing. That night, long after I should have gone home, I stood in the office looking at the 2 photos. The first one, of me with Vaughan in the cafe, and the second, that fake still of me in the alley with Thorne and the mystery man. Both fakes. Both are carefully constructed. Both are utterly useless now. I held them side by side. "You know," I said, "they're almost perfect." "Of course," Wolfe replied without looking up. "Imperfect forgeries are exposed. Perfect ones are doubted. So what made these fail?" He looked up. "You." That stopped me. "Me?" He nodded. "They tried to recreate your surface, your face, your posture, your habits. But not your nature, your rhythm, your speech, your peculiar inconsistency. You're too particular to duplicate. They underestimated the degree to which reality resists imitation. I'm flattered." "You shouldn't be," he said. "You're obnoxious, verbose, careless, and impulsive." "But real," I added. He allowed himself half a nod. "Yes, disgustingly so." I grinned. "Well, it's nice to be useful." Wolfe reached for the clock, wound it once, and turned it slightly to catch the light. Then, softly, he said, "They tried to turn you into an idea, Archie. But an idea doesn't show up in 3 photographs, contradict its own timestamps, and leave a bakery receipt with frosting on it. You, however, do." I couldn't help but laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." He lifted his glass of beer, just slightly. "To permanence," he said. "And to being inconvenient," I replied. The clock ticked once, and that was the end of it.